Hello and welcome back to another chilled out and easy painting video to follow today, and in today's video we're going to be painting a Kruleboyz, one of the new Games Workshop green skins. So without further ado, we're going to get straight into this little miniature, and I'm going to start painting this one with a base colour of Bellow's Russian uniform World War II. Now the colours and numbers will all be displayed across the bottom for you if you'd like to follow on or paint something similar or get a similar sort of effect as to what I'm using. I'm using a simple thin down coat of this Russian uniform colour, and this is one of my favourite colours for green skins because it has, when it dries down to a really nice, great looking sort of matte effect on the miniature as well. It has a really sort of different kind of skin tone to it, so it's not too bright green, it's not too over the top, it's not a dark green, it's a kind of it's an awkward one to explain, and you'll see when it sort of dries just how it looks. But it's one of my favourites anyway because it has a little bit more character to it than just like a flat sort of green colour. And there you go, you can see as it's dry it's got this sort of almost sort of like a camouflage green, and it's a really cool green for a base colour for green skins. Makes them look completely different and unique. So once I've done that, I'm just going to go around and paint the straps and his little sort of pants, I guess. So we're going to paint the straps and his little sort of pants in a bellow sort of dark rust. You could alternatively use a dryad bark from Citadel if you're a Citadel user, but the trick is to just use something that's a really sort of dark brown on this stage, just to tie those sorts of bits of the belt and the straps and things together so that they look a little bit different from the other colours. I'm just going to do a little bit on his teeth as well. So the teeth I'm using are Vallejo Bone White, and this is a creamy sort of colour. Bone White is a really good sort of base colour that you can highlight up later using some brighter colours leading up to sort of whites and things like that. Being a creamy colour, it's not too over the top, it's not too bright, and it makes it really good for things like washes to go on top as well. So for this layer I'm just doing the teeth, and I'm just doing the fingernails and toenails and things like that as well. And then we're moving on to one of my all-time favourite colours as well. So with this miniature, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a sort of brown sepia type wash across it. So I'm using colours that will match and tone in quite nicely with the browns. So this one is a Vallejo orange brown, and as I say, this is one of my all-time favourite colours. This colour really pops. So when we put our wash and things across this colour, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's a very simple colour to use, and it has a really lovely looking effect once it's done. So I'm just covering all of the ropes in this. So as we've done the straps and things like that with the dark brown, we're just using the orange brown for the ropes. And moving on onto the back of the miniature as well, you can see he's got a little pouch here, so just to break up some of those colours, some of those browns, I'm just using a leather brown. Now, leather brown is a really nice sort of bright colour brown, and this will separate that dark brown and the orange brown and give you something else to look at on the back of the miniature so that it's not all one flat colour. So I'm using this to do the pouch across the back of the miniature, but I'm also going to do the handles of the weapons and things like that. So don't forget to do these little bits. I mean, you could do the handles in the darker colour if you want, so using the dark rust or things like that. But for this miniature, I'm using the leather brown just to separate them, make it a little bit brighter because the skin tone is already a little bit dark and things like that. So just looking for a bit more contrast on it. Now, once I've done the detailed bits, now we're going to go on to covering the metals now in a Vallejo gunmetal. Now we're going to do these in sort of like a battered, beaten sort of metal. So I'm using a gunmetal, which you could use a lead belcher if you use Citadel, it's the same sort of thing. The idea is you don't want to use a silver that is too bright. You want a little bit of a darker silver, so something with a little bit more contrast, something that's a little bit more dynamic. If you do it too bright originally, then when you tone it down it's still going to look too bright. So we're going to want to use a darker silver to begin, and then of course we'll batter this silver up with washes and things like that, and I'll show you sort of the effect and the technique that I'm going to use to do it. It's very simple, it's easy to follow, and it's going to look great as well on all your miniatures. These guys are really going to stand out on the board as well. if you follow my painting videos, you'll know that I like to paint the models just slightly different. So I don't like to paint the same as everyone else. So I know that there's a few different ways that people paint green skins, and they're fine and they're great, but I always like to paint my models just a little bit different so that they stand out and they look a little bit more unique. Just because I don't like to follow the norm. So if you're like me and you like painting different things, then this is obviously the type of thing for you. So with the poison or the drips or whatever these kinds of things are, now I envision these as being sort of like a poison, so I'm going to paint these in a really bright green. So I'm using a scorpion green from Vallejo, which is very similar to the moot green from Citadel, and this is just a contrast again from that sort of darker green skin tone on the skin to the really light green that we're going to have on this poison to make it really stand out and really sort of like pull your eye towards the weapon and the drips and things like that. So when I mentioned earlier about doing a sort of battered metal on the miniature, what I'm doing is I'm just going across the, I'm just placing dabs rather of a purple wash now in places on that silver. Now you don't have to be precise or exact with this is just putting drops and dabs and blobs here and there. And the reason for this is because as we tone this down a little later with our shade, it's going to tie those colours into the metal. By tying those colours into the metal's then not going to look flat and one coloured. It's actually going to have a few different tones to it, especially when you twist and turn the miniature in different lights. So I'm not covering the whole bits of silver with this. As you see, I'm just placing little bits here and there with the purple. And the reason for that, like I say, is just to give it a bit more depth and to give it a little bit more colour when it's turning and twisting and when you're looking at the miniature on the table and things like that. It's going to make it look a little bit more individual than just one flat colour. So I've done a few blobs of purple, and now to go on and move and give it another sort of tone and texture, I'm also going to use the Army Painter green tone. Or a green wash if you have a green wash. Now this green wash is something more like a Citadel Bale Tang green, so it's something a little bit lighter, and this is going to contrast between the purple to the green. So again, I'm just putting just dabs of green here and there, not covering all of the silver, just putting dabs here and there so that again it breaks up that silver and it'll break up the wash that we'll put on. Because once I've done with this, we're going to go on, we're going to get a little brave, and we're just going to cover the whole miniature in a single wash. So this is going to tie those colours into that wash as well, so you'll notice a bit more definition to the miniature when he's complete. So just finishing up with the green wash here, just placing a few little bits on the helmet as well. So there you go. Now once all of that is dry, as I say, I'm just going to place a wash across this miniature. Now for this wash I'm using a Vallejo Game Wash. This is a sepia colour, and this is the 200ml bottle. So this is the large bottle that you can buy, which is called the dipping formula. Now I've given this a really good stir, and I don't use this without stirring it a lot. I normally give this about 2 minutes with a coffee stir, and I stir all of the bottom up and get all of the colour and everything to mix in properly. And now this wash in particular is quite strange because you could place this on the miniature, it looks really wet, it looks too sort of orangey with the sepia tone, but once this dries down, it dries into sort of like a chalky finish, and it's very, very forgiving. As you can see on the miniature, it looks really, really good. So as you can see, I was being quite liberal and putting quite a lot of this on to the miniature, and once it dries, it looks really, really good. So once it's dried, I'm just going to go back and then build the colours up. So I'm speeding things up just to show you kind of how my brushwork goes and how I work on these miniatures. And that's all I'm doing, is I'm going back to the original colour, the Russian uniform, and I'm just building up those colours again, leaving the wash in those recessed areas, in those areas where it's pooled. That's all I'm doing now, is just picking out details so that it looks a little bit more defined, so that you get those areas between the muscles and you get those sort of little recessed points where they look like folds and creases, and it creates more depth and definition, more contrast between the light to the dark, and so on and so on and so on. And it looks great once you get to that stage. So like I say, just speeding this up just to show you sort of the brushwork and how I just build this colour back up. Just following along all of those muscles and the muscle tones and the definition. And from there we're going to do similar sort of thing, just with the little pouch on the back. So we're just going to go back to the leather brown, and we're just going to pick out those raised points and try to leave the shade in as much as we can. Now, like I said, I've chosen colours that will work really well with a brown wash. So I've chosen the leather brown, the orange brown on the ropes. The green skin actually works really well with a brown wash as well. So by using that sepia brown wash, it's tying those colours together, which is great because that's exactly what we want. We want those colours to tie together to look like they match, not to have a garish over the top colour sticking out and things like that. Makes it so much easier when you cover your miniature in a wash and then you just build the colours back up, rather than having to go back and try to play about with extremes then. So as you see, I'm just catching the edges of the handle here as well, so that leaves it a little bit darker in the middle and a little bit brighter on the edges. Again, just creating a little bit more definition to it. So from this stage on, we're just going to use a few little mixtures. So for this mixture, I'm using the leather brown that I used on the bag originally, but I'm adding a small bit of bone white into this to highlight it. And this mixture is probably about a 70-30 mixture, so that's 70% leather brown, 30% bone white. And if you're not really sort of fussed on trying to work out all of these mixtures, just add a little dropper here and there of bone white and see how much that highlights. Because you're using the original colour below, this is going to blend in quite nicely anyway. You're not going to be too far off the colour that you need to be at. So yeah, just build it up, see how you go. Get used to mixing. Mixing is a very big part of painting and the hobby, so get used to mixing because it's a really fun and a really rewarding part of painting. From there I'm using the bone white itself, so just a flat bone white now, and I'm just covering back over the teeth and the toenails and the fingernails, and again just leaving the brown in those recessed points just so that it creates that depth and that definition. Bone white now will look quite bright against the miniature, which is exactly what we want, because we want some of those subtle whiter points to stand out and to look really nice. And then using the mixture technique that we just used for the for the bag. So using the mixture technique that we just used for the bag, we're going to do the same thing with the skin. So for this I'm using the Russian uniform, and I'm mixing in a very small mixture, about 70-30 again. Again, it doesn't matter too much about the numbers, it matters more about using the technique to build the colour. And the colour I'm using with this is Elfic Flesh. Elfic Flesh from Vallejo is like bone white, it's just brighter. So this is like a very light cream, so this is almost borderline white cream. And I'm using just a small amount of this just to create that highlight out of the base tone. And as you see, I'm just catching then the very raised points, so across the face, the muscle tones, the areas of the muscles that stick out the most. And again, this is just creating that definition and that contrast between the shaded areas to the highlighted areas. And you can take your time and really work on this, and you can build that up as many times as you like. That's the beauty with skin, is you can build this up 2, 3, 4 times, getting lighter each time, but covering less and less of the skin each time, so that it creates more and more and more highlights. It just depends on how extreme and how far you want to push your miniature painting. Now, depending for sort of like gaming table and gaming miniatures and things, I tend to find doing sort of 1 or 2 highlights is quite enough. But if you want to put them on display, you can really push your technique, and you can really sort of practice and work on building those colours up. And again, I've just put this into a little bit of a sped up painting, just so you can see how I use the brush and the brush work that goes along with me highlighting and things like that. So using a specific highlight now on the whiter points, on the lighter points, I've gone directly to that Vallejo Elfic Flesh. So this is that lighter cream colour that I talked about. And this is just going to sit on top of that bone white. Now sitting on top of the bone white is going to make this colour pop. So this is going to be really bright. And this is what we want. We want this to be nice and bright and stand out, so that you've got little areas in the miniature that really do look like they pop off the miniature, so they stand out a lot more than the base colour then. Something to drag your eye towards. So we're just going to go back to the Scorpion green, that we used for the poison and for the drips. And again, I'm just going to paint these and try to leave the browns in the recess points, the pools and things like that. So this is just catching the raised points of these drips just to get that colour back and get that tone that we originally put in back. Just being careful not to cover over the areas where the brown has settled. Being careful not to get any green on the helmet spike as well. And using the same technique as we used, so we're going back to that scorpion green, and we are mixing in a small amount again of the lighter colour. So we put in the elfic flesh in this, and as you see, I'm just catching the drips this time so that this highlights just the bottom point, so that then it's almost suggesting that they get lighter as they drip off the sword and things like that. Again, these are thin coats of paint, so as they dry, they'll dry a lot nicer and a lot smoother than just putting like a blob of paint on there. So it's always nice to make sure that you water down and thin down your paints, because as they transition onto the miniature, they become a lot more forgiving and they look like they belong a lot better than just being shoved onto the miniature. And then running along with the battered sort of metal kind of effect that I said we were going to do, I'm using the Army Painter Plate Mail Metal for this one. This is just a highlighted metal colour. You can use any kind of highlighted silver that you like. And the point of this one is, because we used the darker silver to begin with, the darker silver then has had the wash put on it, or the multiple washes put on it, to get those colours and make it look a little bit battered and worn and rusted and things like that. And then we're just going to highlight the real edges and get some of the highlights sort of dry brushed across with a lighter tone. So for me, I'm using the plate mail metal. The Army Painter, for me, they are some of my favourite metallics. They're really nice, quick, easy metallics. They stand out, they pop really nicely on the miniature, and it should look really, really nice with just a light sort of dry brush across. You don't want to go too extreme and undo all of the work that you've done with the wash. This is just a nice, light, soft dry brush just to catch the extreme edges, to make it shine around what you've done. And that's him complete. This is our Kruleboyz. We don't need really to go into too much detail on the orange that we've got across the ropes. They look great as they are. As I say, for the tabletop standard, there's nothing wrong with this. This looks really cool. A different kind of colour scheme to the ones that you've probably seen online. Nice battered metal technique, and something that's easy and cool to follow. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support, and take care.